guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and I'm back here at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the really cool guns they have in their 2014 Premier Auction. One that really jumped out at me was this factory prototype of the Colt offensive pistol. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, yes, in fact, this pistol does look rather offensive. But in fact, the moniker offensive pistol came from the name of US SOCOM requirements for the Offensive Handgun Weapon System, OHWS. This was a request that was put out in the early 1990s by SOCOM, which is, of course, Special Operations Command. They wanted a handgun that would be as effective as possible as a primary firearm for special operations personnel in those situations where, for whatever reason, they weren't able to use a carbine or rifle. So what they wanted specifically was a handgun in 45 auto plus P. The idea was to use 185 grain, relatively high velocity load of the cartridge. And they wanted a gun that could withstand quite a lot of volume of fire, primarily in training. They didn't want the guns to just come apart mechanically over time. At this point, apparently they were having some trouble with their Beretta 92s doing that. They were shooting so much in training that the guns were simply falling victim to fatigue. They didn't have the durability for it. So there were only two companies that submitted guns to this program for testing. One was Colt with this pistol. The other was H&K with what was ultimately selected as the Mark 23, basically a version of the H&K USP. Now, H&K had a bit of an advantage in this request, this RFP, because they already had the USP in development internally. And it wasn't that much work for them to go ahead and adopt the pistol to SOCOM requirements. I should say there were a couple other requirements of the program as well. In addition, just to the cartridge, it was required that the pistol would be delivered with a silencer or a suppressor and also with a laser aiming module. So this was not that big a deal for HK to adapt. Colt, on the other hand, didn't have a pistol on hand that met these requirements. The 1911 wasn't really suited to be built up to the point that it could sustain this sort of volume of fire with plus P 45 loads. And Colt decided it was more cost effective to start with a new pistol designed from scratch than to try and adapt the 1911. So what they did, they took elements from several of their existing handgun designs. The firing pin mechanism and the frame are pretty much 1911. The firing mechanism, the trigger mechanism, is more or less out of the Colt Double Eagle, and the lockup mechanism is straight out of the Colt All-American 2000. You may be thinking that not a whole lot of those particular guns were all that successful, and you'd be right. Ultimately, in trials, the Colt offensive handgun here failed pretty thoroughly compared to the USP. Only about 30 of these were ever made because they didn't go any further than the first set of trials. HK, of course, won the contract. Now, despite its failure in trials, these have a lot of kind of neat features to them. In fact, pistols that don't work, I find, are often more interesting than the ones that do go on to become very successful. So why don't we go ahead and take a closer look at this, and we can see what exactly is going on and all the neat mechanical bits to it. All right, so taking a closer look at the offensive handgun here, I'm going to start by pulling out the magazine. We should note that this is an aftermarket mag that's been converted to work in this pistol. This isn't an original magazine. Originally, they did have 10-round single-stack mags that fit flush. This is a 1911 magazine that's been modified to fit, and it does stick out a little bit. But that's not important at the moment. Let's take a look at the controls as well, because this pistol has pretty much all of the controls. We have a really big magazine release button here, works just like a 1911. We have our slide stop, also works just like a 1911. Then, this is a double action, or a DASA pistol. So we have a thumb safety here, which is ambidextrous. It's on both sides. That locks the hammer in its cocked position. We also have, when I deactivate the safety, I have a decocker right here. So this pistol can be fired either single action or double action. It can be carried it can be carried double action hammer down, or I can manually cock the hammer, put the safety on, and carry it that way. That gives, in theory, that gives these special forces guys the option to do whatever they want.
The downside in practice is it means that there's a whole ton of stuff kind of coming out of the side of this gun. That many controls does definitely lead to the potential for flubbing under stress and pushing the wrong button. Now, let's see, moving on. One of the requirements, of course, of this request, this RFP, was that the gun had to be capable of having a suppressor mounted. Now, because this pistol has a rotating barrel lockup, there's no real good way to attach a suppressor and maintain reliability because the barrel's rotating and turning every time you fire. So what Colt did instead was they designed this system where, and this is a stand-in flash suppressor / muzzle brake, where they actually would attach the suppressor to the frame of the gun instead of the barrel. Now, I believe this changed. The exact mechanism of this lockup changed by the time they sent some pistols actually in for trials, because this lockup is frankly pretty cheesy. The way this works, we have two little spring-loaded pins here, and I push them in and up like this. Let's take a close look at that. You can see these two pins here. I push them in and up, and then this slides out. So this is the muzzle brake version. It would have a front sight mounted right here, which is missing on this piece. This is, like I said, this is a factory prototype, so it's not a finished product, but you'd have your front sight here, your suppressor mounts onto this and attaches into those two grooves. So, moving on with disassembly, this comes apart very much like a standard 1911. We have a cross pin here. Unlike the 1911, this isn't actually connected to the slide stop, and it is captive. So what I do is pull the slide back just slightly, push this pin in. There we go. That goes in. And then I can pull it out on this side to there. Then slide comes off the front. Now, you'll notice this is pretty similar to a 1911, except it's got this odd cutout. That is for the camming lug on the barrel. If we go to the slide, we also have a captive recoil spring. That's a nice improvement. And then we have a rotating barrel. Now, if you've looked at the internals of any other rotating barrel pistols, I have videos on a number of them, you'll know that this is a pretty common look for a rotating barrel design. These four pieces, or five right here, are your locking lugs. They rotate into these locking recesses right there, inside the slide. Then our last large lug back here sits in the frame, just like that, and at rest, when the gun's ready to fire, it sits right about there. And this is a short recoil action, just like a Browning gun. And so when you fire, this comes back, this cam rotates in that channel, which forces the barrel to rotate slightly. Let's see if I can get that a little better. Sits there, and it rotates just that much. And that's enough to unlock the locking lugs, and then the barrel stops and the slide moves backward, and the whole cycling process takes place. The back of the slide, you can see, is a pretty typical, just like on a 1911, you've got a firing pin in there, the firing pin retaining plate. It does have an internal extractor, which we can see coming out right there. So overall, it was an attempt at an improved pistol. It was kind of one that was hindered by time constraints on the part of Colt, and they were able to it has some good elements to it, but it's not fully thought out. The USP was definitely the superior gun for the US military to choose for this role. Best on camera here. Reassembly is pretty simple. We just bring the slide back to this position, wiggle this guy in to right there. We can drop in this, push it all the way in, and then right here, drop those down, and they engage. Drop those pins down, they engage. They're spring-loaded, they push out into the side and lock that muzzle brake in place.
So whether or not the concept of an offensive handgun was a realistic and practical one, the USP was definitely the superior pistol compared to this Colt offensive design. This is heavy. This is a heavy gun. It's about 33 ounces, so about 3 1/3 pounds. It does feel reasonably good in the hand. The grip is almost as wide as one would expect from a double stack pistol, despite it only having a single stack magazine. The grip panels on it are fairly wide. So it does fill the hand well. The beaver tail's nice. You're not going to get hammer bite from it. But all that being said, this piece clearly needed more development before it was ready for prime time. So only a few dozen of these were made. It's really cool to have had the opportunity to take a look at this one. And what's even cooler is that it, being at an auction house, it is for sale. And if you want it, you can place a bid for it. We have a link to the lot on the Rock Island's catalog page below. So you can drop over there and take a look at some of their pictures as well. And if you're interested, you can go ahead and place a bid online right now. So if you're interested, good luck. Hope you win it. And thanks for watching, guys. Tune in again to ForgottenWeapons.com.